Hello, welcome to Kimmel Bay Church Vlogs. Today our focus is on a line in 2 verses, and that line is, "Get behind me, Satan." I'm going to read the 2 verses where this line appears first of all. So it appears in Mark chapter 8 verse 33. "But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, he rebuked Peter. 'Get behind me, Satan,' he said. 'You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns.'" And then in Matthew chapter 16, verse 23, Jesus turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." This rebuke seems so harsh, especially when addressing Peter, one of his closest disciples. Imagine how Peter must have felt when Jesus turned and called him Satan. Why did Peter deserve such a rebuke? Jesus had just revealed for the first time to his disciples that he would suffer, die, and rise again. Peter reprimanded Jesus at this point for saying such things, for having such a fatalistic mindset. Just moments before, though, Peter had declared Jesus was the Messiah. And I think probably he couldn't reconcile in his own mind that Jesus was the Messiah, and yet Jesus was going to suffer and die on a cross. Peter's intent to protect Jesus from going to the cross meant that he became a tool for Satan. Unwittingly, Peter was speaking for Satan to prevent the will of God. So why did Jesus call him Satan? Well, Jesus told him that he didn't care about things of God, but about what people thought. Peter had quickly switched his mindset and his perspective and focus from God to seeing man's perspective. He'd gone from seeing God's perspective to seeing man's perspective, for seeing God's plan to seeing man's horrors and thoughts of what was going to happen to Jesus. He was seeing earthly values, and Jesus was telling him the way of the cross is God's will. It's the only plan of redemption for mankind. At the time, Jesus' stern reprimand didn't make sense to Peter at all. However, we can see clearly how Peter had the wrong perspective of God's plan for Jesus. We know now that he had to suffer, he had to die for the redemption of all mankind. It sends a clear and profound message to us of how easy it is to unwittingly become a spokesperson for Satan. When we get distracted by circumstances, when we don't understand what is happening around us, or when our focus becomes on our careers, our possessions, our desires, or even our achievements, rather than our focus being on sacrifice and serving God, proclaiming the good news of Jesus and what he has done for us. Peter was rebuked by Jesus to get him back on track. We need to keep our eyes focused on Jesus, focused on the will of God, focused from a God's perspective, not from our perspective. We need to keep our eyes and our minds and our hearts fixed on God and what his will is, so that we don't experience a rebuke from him in the way that Peter did. Have a blessed week. Thank you for listening.